don't need to stand out there. You don't need to. Let's dive into this. Genesis 43. And we're going to cover Genesis 43 to Genesis 50. Somehow, some way, we're going to do it, all right? But let's begin. I wanted to give you just a little bit of beginning here. Reconciliation. Joseph was reunited with his brothers. And one of the wonderful things about studying the scriptures, now, I'm not going to go compete with you, Legia. Not going to compete. Okay. All right. Are we ready? We're ready. All right. Genesis 43. Let's do this. So I'm going to ask you, you're going to need your Bible. So a lot of verses are not going to be up here. But let's pick it up. Genesis 43, verse 15. And the men took that present, and they took double money in their hand. Benjamin rose up, and they went down to Egypt, and they stood before Joseph. Now, I'm not going to go through that whole story, other than let's just sum it up, all right? So they're making this journey from Canaan, Beersheba area, and they're coming all the way down now into Egypt. It's about probably a 300-mile journey that they're going to take. They are going to arrive before an Egyptian ruler. He has been hard. He has been difficult. They have no idea it's their brother, right? Now remember, he put in prison Simeon. I've always wondered, what was Simeon doing? You ever wondered that? Like, Simeon is in prison, Egyptian prison. Was Joseph saying, well, give him a cut of prime beef down there, and or was it prison? What was happening? The Bible doesn't seem to indicate that Simeon knew who Joseph was. So the brothers went home, remember, and they have sacks of grain. And when they get home and they tell Jacob that they left Simeon behind, well, he's upset. I've lost Joseph, now I've lost Simeon, and now you're telling me that Benjamin has to go back with you to Egypt. And of course, Jacob says, no way, not going to happen, right? And so they go, enough time goes by, they're running out of food. Now, I don't know how much time goes by, but it was enough. They had to go back to Egypt. And that's where this picks up. Now, I'm going to invite you. We're going to jump over. There's so much we can look at. Genesis 43, returning. Genesis chapter 44. You got all the dynamics that starts happening here. In fact, if you have your Bible, Genesis 43, verse 29, Joseph lifted up his eyes. He saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, Rachel, and said, is this your younger brother? Now, he's still disguising himself, of whom you spake unto me. He said in verse 29, God be gracious unto thee, my son. So you've got this unfolding of an unusual event that is happening. Now remember, Joseph is talking through a translator. So he's still speaking, I guess it would be Egyptian. The brothers are Hebrew, and so there's a translator. So there's a distance between Joseph and his brothers at this. And then we could go on, the dinner that is set in verse 31, he washed his face, he went out, he refrained himself, and he said, set on bread. And they sat on for him by himself, and by them by themselves. Let me see if I've got a little bit of this here that I can give you. So I'm going to walk through. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I don't want to take a lot of time in this part here, but just a little bit of insight. In Genesis 43, Joseph has the brothers come to his house. Now, they don't know why they're going to his house, but as he brings them to his house, Simeon is brought out of prison, and he joins the brothers. They still don't know what is going on, right? So Joseph comes out. He is probably sitting on an elevated platform, or maybe like, not a throne, but an elevated chair and a table. His brothers are seated down below him. Does anybody remember what was unusual about how they were seated? They were seated by age. And so they're all wondering, how did he know this? So he started with the oldest, and he went all the way down to the youngest. And they're saying, something's not right here, right? And then the food is brought out and it's placed on the table. However, Benjamin is given 5 times the amount of food. I wonder what that looked like, you know? So you start, in a carnal way, you would start with Reuben and you'd give him just a little bit, right? A teacup, right? And then you go on to the next and give him a little bit bigger plate. But then you get over here to Benjamin and you're heaping. I mean, his plate is loaded with food. And they're all looking at Benjamin, and they still don't know what's going on. Now, here's a question for you. Maybe somebody's got the answer. Why does the Bible give us all those little details? You ever wondered? Why coloring this picture the way it is? Why all of these details? I don't have an answer. Ted, you got an answer? Right.
He then comes bursting into their lives. But first of all, it is just so very real, and we can identify it.
Yeah. Which the tragedy is when we don't study the Old Testament. I wrote a devotion, I think it was published today, was it, about lenders and borrowers, or is that tomorrow's devotion? I can't remember. Is it tomorrow? Today, lenders and borrowers. You know, we live in a day in which the Ten Commandments are painted as negative and they're hard and they're difficult. But when you read the commandments and the law, you realize the guidelines of God are gracious and merciful. I had some you get these solicitations for credit cards, right? And so I had some credit card solicitation, which I have no interest in that credit card, but they were 30% interest. 30% interest. And they called the Bible hard and difficult, right? You know, the Bible actually is gracious. Let me move on. So I'm going to, that part is here, Genesis 44. They still don't know who he is. Go with me to Genesis 45 now. Then Joseph, in verse 45, could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. And he cried, cause every man to go out from me. Now remember, second in Egypt, right? This isn't Kamala Harris. This is the big man, right? You've got Pharaoh, and then you've got Joseph. So when you look at in chapter 45 and verse 1, he could not refrain himself. You better believe that the Egyptian servants are getting nervous. They know that he is upset. What is he upset about? Chapter 45 again, in verse 1, cause every man go out from me. And there stood no man with him while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. So here's the revelation. And let me see how much I got there. The revelation then, verse 2, Joseph wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. In other words, the servants went out, but what did they do? They probably did what you and I would do. Right? What's going on? Well, they are listening. Verse 3, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. But some of those brothers' hearts stopped right then, right? Banquet's over. We're going to be the dessert, right? So let's keep reading. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. And the first question, doth my father yet live? Wow. Isn't that wonderful? How's Dad doing? Love that. Let's keep going. And his brethren could not answer him. Now notice, for they were troubled at his presence. They couldn't answer him. You know why? I mean, this is life and death that we're looking at here. So that's the revelation. I'm just going to fill it in quickly for you. Number 3, look at the relief. Verse 5. I'm going to read verse 4 and then verse 5. Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. And he said, I am Joseph your brother. Then what does he say? Whom ye sold into Egypt. I like that. You know why? He reminded them what they had done. Right? Now, let's keep reading. Verse 5. Now therefore be not grieved, though. Now there's the relief. Nor angry with yourselves. Now what? That ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. What do you call that? Sovereignty, right? Sovereignty of God. Let's read it again. Be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves. Now, why would he say that? You know why? Because we've watched these brothers constantly bickering, right? Right? Reuben says, didn't I tell you? Don't hurt the boy, and now look at us. Remember? The constant bickering. You're going to see that again later, that he knows what kind of guys, what kind of men these are. So we've got the reassurance I wanted to give you, and I'm hoping the verses are here. Let me walk you through the sovereignty of God. Yeah, here it is. Let me read verse 7. Again, I'm going to go back up. Pick it at verse 5 and 6 or 7 if you have your Bible. Be not grieved. God did send me before you to preserve life. Verse 6, now these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing, the earing of harvesting, nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth. So if we go back up, I see the sovereignty of God in verse 5. God did send me before you. Now we see the providence of God. Verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Let me give you some thoughts on the sovereignty and providence of God. The Lord bringeth the counsel of the heathen to naught. He maketh the devices of the people of none effect. The counsel of the Lord standeth forever. Have you ever had an enemy? Maybe somebody at work, maybe a neighbor, maybe a family member. They were an outright enemy. They would destroy you if they could. And yet, here's the psalmist writing, I think it might have been David, the counsel of the Lord standeth forever. Here's another. There are many devices in a man's heart, nevertheless the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. Isaiah 46 and verse 10, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Here's another, and you know this, when we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. What does all this tell us about God? God is interested in what? What's good for you? What's best for you? That God can take an enemy's desires to destroy you and use it for his glory and your good. Anybody testimonies or thoughts or experiences in life you might want to share? Anyone? Yeah, for Israel to have a national land once again. Absolutely. Somebody else. Yeah, Rob? Yep, yep. Yep.
Yet if you're one of the people that died 100 years before that, you don't appreciate that.
Right.
Then you have to realize that sometimes the Lord, we're not going to know.
Well, you know, Jacob, we'll see this hopefully before we close tonight. Jacob has his sons come to his bedside, and he says, I want to tell you what God is doing. And it is that God is going to make of you a great nation. You know, he had the covenant promise he wanted his sons to remember. Now, how many in Egypt remembered that, the Israelites, during all the slavery and the horrors of it? And, you know, it would have been so easy to give up. You know, I would remind us as God's people and our nation, it's easy to get discouraged. But can I remind you, the same God that birthed this nation out of a revolution that we should have lost, The United States should have never been a nation because we were fighting the greatest force, armed force, that had ever been seen in the world. That was England, Great Britain. We should have never won. But there's so many testimonies of the founding fathers and the intervention of the sovereignty of God and the providence of God that this nation was a miracle, right? God is no less in 2023 than he was in 1776. He's no less God. Let me keep going. Let's keep going. All right. Chapter 45, verse 8. So now it was not you that sent me hither, and that I wanted to highlight this, but God. Wow. Those rascal brothers sold me into slavery, and I've been a slave. I've been in prison, and now he looks back and he says it was all what God was doing. What a wonderful, comforting testimony. Let me move on. I want you to see not only then Joseph's compassion, but I also want you to see Joseph's invitation. You're familiar with this. I don't need to read it, but look at verse 9 of chapter 45. Haste ye, go up to my father, saying to him, Thus saith thy son Joseph, God hath made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me and tarry not. Can you imagine me and Jacob, right? And one day you look over the horizon, and there is this caravan coming toward you. You've got all of these beasts bearing burdens and the wealth and the symbols of Egypt, as Joseph has sent wagons to transport Jacob and all of his household and relocate them to Egypt. So you can imagine one day they come in and they said, Jacob, there's a caravan coming. It's an Egyptian caravan. Now, if I'm Jacob looking at the pastor with these boys, the first thing I'm thinking, what have they done this time, right? Remember the last time they came back with their bags of grain and all their money was in it, right? And so Jacob went to the opinion that they'd stolen the grain, right? And so now the boys have gone back, and I don't know how much time has gone by, but now they're coming back, and there's this caravan of Egyptians that are coming. And if I'm Jacob, I'm probably thinking, we're all going to get killed. I don't know what those boys have done, but they have done it this time. Let me keep moving. 9 through 11, you could read the promises of Joseph. I'm going to invite you to look at verse 11. Joseph says, and I regarded the land of Goshen, and he says, I will nourish thee. And then he goes on and says, there are yet 5 years of famine. Wow. How many of you still have a father or a mother still alive? How many of you do? Okay. As you get older and you see mom and dad getting more frail, your heart longs, right, to do whatever you can to be a blessing, to help in any way that you can. Sheila and I will be going home soon to look in on her mom down at the coast. In fact, you probably know this. One of the reasons we bought a house out further north, we could get a big enough house that Mom could stay in the house and I could stay in the house too. We can get along together, you know. She's probably listening online, so that's why I said that. But the point I wanted to make to you with this, though, is that Joseph's heart was for his father. All these years that's gone by. Come and I'll nourish you. So we've got the recognition in verse 12. This is Joseph speaking to his brothers because they're still astounded. And he says to his brothers in verse 12, Behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brother Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto thee. I've often wondered, and I don't know if Ted or Brian have an opinion, but in verse 12, I've often wondered if the physical resemblance of Joseph was much like his brother. Remember, all the others had different mothers, but only Benjamin and Joseph had the same mother. So when I look at verse 12, my eyes and my mouth, I often wonder, was there a physical resemblance between Joseph and his brother? Is that what he was referring to? So I don't know. But anyway, enough of that. Moving on. I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to bring you to reconciliation, all right? So they have been stunned. They haven't even been able to speak. They are listening. They're watching. Verse 13 of 45. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt. Hey, Dad, success, all right? You know, this hasn't come to my graduation. This has come to my palace, right? The son that you thought was dead is the second in power in all of Egypt. What an incredible thought. You know, we'll look at Moses maybe Sunday, but think about Moses, born in a slave's household and adopted by the daughter of Pharaoh. You know, God has a wonderful way of working, doesn't he? Moving on, reconciliation. Pick it up at verse 14. We shouldn't skip this one. Let's look at it. And so verse 13, he says, go and tell my dad of all the honor, of all that you have seen, and ye shall haste, bring down my father hither, not our father, my father. Verse 14, and he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren and wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. I wanted to take a moment and look at the last part. Verse 15, and after that, his brethren talked with him. Here's a question. What did they talk about? Where do you begin, right? Joseph says, well, let me tell you what happened to me, right? Slavery, false accusations, imprisoned, now reigning. But then they also probably talked about what dad is like. How are things at home? How big is your family? You know, how many children do you have? How many grandchildren are there? All the things that you would want to catch up on. Moving on. Pharaoh's intervention. Remember, the slaves of Joseph, or the servants, they're listening, right? They're hearing all of this. So how did Pharaoh respond? Look at verse 16. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house. Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, say unto thy brethren, this do ye, laid your beasts, go, get you into the land of Canaan. Verse 18, take your father and your households and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Wow, let's just pause. The rest of Egypt is suffering what? Famine. But Pharaoh says, because of Joseph, go home and get your father. Bring your family back. And I'm going to give you the best of Egypt. Wow. Does God take care of his people? He does. You never know what he's up to, but you can be sure it's good. Intervention. Moving on. Joseph's admonition. You'll like this. I get a kick out of this. So we pick it up at, let me see if I put any of this up here. Yeah, let me look at it up here, and you can, on the PowerPoint. The children of Israel did so. Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment. Pharaoh gave them provision for the way. That's why I said there's this caravan of wagons that are going across the desert, going back home. Verse 24, and so he, Joseph, sent his brethren away, and they departed. And he said unto them, see that ye fall not out by the way. What exactly does that mean? No. Don't start fussing and fighting and feuding again, right? After all of this. I mean, they you know, what would they start fussing and fighting about? You know what? You see what you've done? You know? Well, I'm glad God's on the throne, because if it was because of you, Simeon, we'd all be lost. You know, see that you fall not out by the way. You know, it's always amazing to me how quickly things can turn, right? Somebody is your friend one day and they're your enemy next, right? What I love about the scriptures is these are human people. These are sinners. You would think leaving Joseph and all of this provisions and wealth, you would think they would have nothing but hallelujah moments, right? I mean, they should have been charismatics crossing the desert, but they weren't. He knew what they could do, and so he warned them, don't do it.
So, what is it that Joseph thinks they're going to argue?
I don't know. You tell me. One of it would be who's to blame for Joseph being where he is.
You wonder if Simeon did look at Reuben and say, see, I was right this time.
Yeah. Say that again? Oh, yeah. How are we going to explain to Dad that for 27 years we've made him think that Joseph's dead, and now we got to get back home and we got to tell Dad Joseph's sitting on the throne in Egypt. Who's going to explain that one, you know? Or somebody has said, you got some splaining to do, right, when you get there. So that might have been it, to think about it. They might have been fussing about who's going to ante up and just say, it was us. All right, moving on. Let's keep going. Study news. Joseph is alive. Yeah.
I like it here. It applies to what we're doing. We're packing right now. He told them, don't even pack. He said, leave your stuff. Verse number 12. In regard not to your stuff, but the good and just go bring the people. We'll give you.
Yeah. Just go home and say, Linda, you know what? We're just going to leave it all here. That probably won't work. Yeah, don't leave the books. All right, let me point you down to verse 26. Let's get the announcement. Well, verse 25 of chapter 45. And they went up out of Egypt. They came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive. I don't know what would have happened at that moment, right? It goes on, and we read, he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And of course, Jacob, knowing what kind of boys these were, what kind of men they were, Jacob's heart fainted. He became feeble, for he believed them not. Would you believe him? No? 27 years of letting me believe he's dead. Now you're coming home and say, he's alive, you know. Look at verse 28. And Israel, oh no, let's pick it up at verse 27. And they told him all the words of Joseph which he had said unto them. Remember, he didn't believe them. But when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. He didn't believe a thing they said. But his eyes didn't lie, right? He saw all the wealth that had been brought. And I didn't look at all that. That you can look at that earlier. It talks about the 300. Well, let me take you to verse 22, just out of curiosity for you to see it. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment, but to Benjamin he gave him 300 pieces of silver, 5 changes of raiment. You can look at verse 23. Asses laden with good things of Egypt. 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat, and by his father all the way. So they came home with a whole lot more than they had anticipated. So in verse 27, the father revived. Verse 28, and Israel said, it is enough. Joseph, my son, is yet alive, and I will go and see him before I die. By the way, he lived 17 more years. He has 17 more years. Let me keep going. I got to fill this in quickly. Relocation. Israel, Jacob's household moved from Canaan to Egypt. There's a lot that I could talk to you about, but let's pick it up at verse 1. I don't know if I didn't do it. All right. Genesis 46, verse 1. Israel took his journey, Israel being Jacob. Now remember, when we read in the scriptures Jacob, we're looking at a man who is lacking in faith, right? More of the carnal man, the old man. When we read Israel, we're looking at the man that contends with God, the man that is confident, is conscious of God's presence. And so we come to chapter 46 and verse 1. And Israel took his journey with all that he had. He came to Beersheba, and he offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. This is the last stop before the Arabian Peninsula. Jacob will never physically see home again. This is it. Beersheba is where Abraham worshipped and sacrificed. Beersheba is where Isaac had sacrificed. Beersheba is now where Jacob sacrifices. He is going away, and he knows it is going to be a season that his family will not be back home. Let me keep moving. Assurances. Let's pick it up at Genesis 46 and verse 2. And God spake unto Israel in the visions of the night, and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, Here am I. Now here's a question. Why did God say his name twice? And he didn't say Israel, Israel. He said, Jacob, Jacob. Martha, Martha, right. Right. Let me give you some examples of that. In Genesis 22, verse 11, this is the intimacy of God. Genesis 22, verse 11, God said, Abraham, Abraham. 1 Samuel chapter 3, verse 10, God speaks and he says, Samuel, Samuel. Martha, you've already mentioned Luke 10. Acts chapter 9, verse 4, Saul, Saul. The intimacy of hearing your name. Now, for me, if I heard my name twice growing up, I'm in big trouble. Especially if I heard my middle name. But with this, you know, when somebody speaks, and perhaps the second time they say it is softer, it causes you to listen more, right? Jacob. Jacob. Now, let me walk it out and see if I put the verse up there. Yeah, I did. Yeah. Let me keep reading it. All right, I'm going to pick it up at verse 2. And he said, and Jacob said, Here am I. Now, here's the verse. And God said, I am God, the God of thy father, who was Isaac, right? Fear not to go down into Egypt. What does God promise? For I will there make of thee a great nation. Now, that's the promise that Jacob, as he's dying, remember, you have that family reunion, all the boys come to their father's bedside, and he goes through all 12 sons, and he will give to Joseph specifically the promise. Now, he's not, you know, it's Judah that's going to be the spokesman and the heir. Let me keep reading. Verse 4, God says, I will go down with thee into Egypt. I will also surely bring thee up again. It won't be Jacob, but it will be his lineage. And Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. What a wonderful thought, isn't it? Let me keep going. I know the choir's going to be stepping out of here in a moment. Let me give you the roster here. So, of Jacob's family. I'm not going to go through all these because it repeats again in Genesis 49 as well. But just quickly, Genesis 46 in verse 8, we have Reuben, the firstborn, verse 10, Simeon, verse 11, Levi, verse 12, Judah. You've got the whole list of names. I'm not going to take time and go through them because I want to get towards the end. Let me take you to the reunion, all right? Genesis 46, look at verse 28 and 30. Genesis 46 and verse 28 and 30. And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen, and Joseph made ready his chariot. I love that. Now, you know, I wish I could portray it in a good way for you, but here we have this, basically the second ruler of Egypt. And as you look at the verse here, which brother was it that was sent ahead of him? Let me go back. Where was it? Somebody help me. All right, verse 28. He sent Judah before him unto Joseph. Now, it's interesting. Judah is going to be the royal line, right? Right? David, Solomon, and ultimately Christ. All right, so Judah already becomes more prominent as you watch this unfold here in the scriptures. So who is sent to Joseph? It's not Reuben, it's not Simeon, it's Judah. So Judah is sent to Joseph and says, your family's here, they're coming into the land. And then you got this wonderful moment where Joseph gets onto his chariot, and probably covered in gold like it would have been in the royal families. And here goes Joseph, who knows how many were accompanying him, going to meet his father. Let me press on here. Well, let's look at verse 29. Genesis 46, verse 29. Joseph made ready his chariot. He went up to meet Israel, not Jacob, Israel, his father, to Goshen, and presented himself unto him, and then fell on his neck and wept on his neck a good while. You can picture it. Presented himself unto him. I believe he bowed to his father. Even though he's the second ruler of Egypt, when it came to his father, there was humility. And then he falls on his father's neck. And notice what it says, and he wept on his neck, what? A good while. I don't know what that means. What does it mean? He couldn't contain himself, right? What did he think about? What did they talk about? All that had transpired. And now he's going to save his family. Let me press on. Here's I'm going to call it the resume. It's kind of interesting looking at verse 31 through 34. You can see a dynamic here I wanted to point out to you. Joseph said it to his brothers. Now what is he doing? He's getting them ready to meet Pharaoh. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and show Pharaoh, and say unto him, my brethren and my father's house, which are in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. Verse 32, and the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle. For they have brought their flocks, their herds, and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you, and shall say, what is your occupation? That you shall say, thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we, our fathers, that you may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So what do your brothers do? Oh, we're into cattle. They're really into sheep, right? But we're into cattle. It's not a lie. They did have cattle. Yes. Do they today? Oh, yeah. Right. Yep, this is true. And the word abomination, by the way, means to be detestable. To be detestable. So why is he telling them to prepare them to what to say to Pharaoh? Because he wants them to be in the land of Goshen. He wants them in the best place. And of course, Pharaoh says, you know what? You're over all my cattle then, So they are promoted to a place of prominence. Let me keep going. Presentations. We don't have time to read it, and I'm so sorry, but this whole story. Then Joseph came and he told Pharaoh, and he said, my father and my brother and the flocks and their herds are all come into the land. And he took some of his brethren, verse 2, even 5 men, presented them unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? All right? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are, what did they say? Shepherds. I often wonder if Jacob thought, you're cattlemen, But anyway, verse 4, and they said, moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come. In other words, we're not here to stay, right? We're nomads. We're not here. Egypt's not my home. I'm just passing through. That's really the implication of what they're saying there. Verse 4, and they said, moreover, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land. Pharaoh spake unto Joseph in verse 5, saying, thy father and thy brethren are coming to thee. Look at verse 6. The land of Egypt is before thee, in the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell. The land of Goshen, let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, make them rulers over my cattle. The men of activity means valiant men, a man's man, all right? Men that have authority, men that can lead. And so Pharaoh is saying, Joseph, I'm going to trust you to pick among your brothers who's going to be a strong man, look after my interests. I should have used some of these and I didn't. Provision. I don't have time to read it. Verse 11, Joseph placed his father, his brethren, gave them possession in the land, the best of the land. Verse 12, Joseph nourished his father and his brother and all of his father's household. And then look at verse 13, and there was no bread in the land. So here's what you have. Egypt is getting weaker. Israel is going to be getting stronger. That will go all the way through to Moses. Right? Why does Pharaoh in Exodus chapter 1 say, slay the sons of Israel. You know why? Because they were becoming stronger. They were growing. So what God did was he used the famine to weaken Egypt. But Pharaoh's looking after Israel, and they are going to continue to grow stronger. There's a parallel we could draw with America right now. We've opened our southern border. We're getting in uneducated, violent, gang-related, child abusers. They're all moving in to our nation by the hundreds of thousands. As we as a country assimilate that weakness, we grow weaker. And our government is strengthening the very ones that are our enemy. History repeats itself. I believe we're, as a nation, are receiving a long overdue judgment. Our economy is crushing. Our school system's out of control. It is bent against us. They have rejected our Constitution, and we are importing hundreds of thousands who are going to live on the dole. We're going to pay for it. I've read where there are like 5-star hotels and all in Texas that are filled with illegal immigrants. And we're paying for that, you know? Anyway, enough of that. That's how the shepherd gets hated. All right, moving on. All right, I did want to give you an idea of a silo, a storehouse. I mentioned on Sunday there are ruins of storehouses in some of the ancient cities of Egypt, and obviously made of clay or stone, and then covered over, in which grain would have been stored for the people. If it was our day, somebody would set it on fire, and you'd all wonder, how could that happen, right? Do you know what I'm talking about, some of you? Yeah, all right. All right, Jacob's arrangements. Let's look at that, because I need to wrap it up, I know. Chapter 47, verse 28 through 31. Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the whole age of Jacob was 147 years old. And the time drew nigh that Israel must die, and he called his son Joseph. I always find it interesting, right? So, verse 28, the whole age of Jacob. Verse 29, Israel must die. And he called his son Joseph, and he said unto him, If now I have found grace in thy sight, put I pray thee thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me, bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. Where was Jacob's heart, or Israel's heart? His heart was in the land that God had promised him. So don't bury me in Egypt. Verse 30, I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. And he said, Swear unto me. And he sware unto him. And Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. Now I want to keep going, and I want you to see a few things just quickly. Joseph has 2 sons. Verse 1 of chapter 48, came to pass after these things, that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee. And Israel strengthened himself, that is, he sat up upon his bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed me. So he's going to now start sharing the covenant promise. He said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee. I will make of thee a multitude of people. I will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. Now, let me keep going. Notice in verse 5 through 7 then. And now thy 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben is Simeon, they shall be mine. Now what he's saying is they will take the place of Reuben and Simeon. All right, let's keep reading. And thy issue which thou begattest after thee shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. Now, what is happening is this, is that Joseph is designating Ephraim and Manasseh as the two tribes, right? They are now taking the place. They'll take the place of Levi, right? Why? Because God chooses the Levites tribes. So they are not in that 12 that's over here. And then there's Simeon, right? Am I getting it right? Simeon will be absorbed by Judah. So replacing Simeon and Levi will be Manasseh and Ephraim. So that's it. When you look, let me see if I've got it up here. I know you don't want to like me jumping through things like this. Okay, let me do this quickly. All right, so we have the 12 tribes of Israel here. We've got Abraham and Sarah, Rebekah and Isaac, and then Jacob. Jacob has the four, I don't know why I'm pointing at the screen, has the four wives, 2 wives and 2 handmaidens, and the sons that descended down from them. But Joseph is saying, your son Joseph will be mine. So let me state it in a better way. Joseph will get 2 parts, while the other brothers get 1 part. Simeon will be a tribe, but they will be absorbed by Judah. They'll be kind of in the midst of Judah. But Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the sons not of Jacob but the sons of Joseph, will be tribes themselves. In fact, Ephraim will be a great tribe. Manasseh will be a great tribe. In fact, remember, Manasseh will divide. Half of Manasseh will be on the east side of Jordan. Half of Manasseh will be on the west side of Jordan. Now, let me go back, and I need to fill the blanks in, and I apologize. I shouldn't be doing like this, but let me finish it up quickly. So what does Jacob do on his deathbed? On his deathbed, he says, I'm adopting your sons, and they will be my sons. So your sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, will get a portion of the land. That was God's way of honoring Joseph. He honored Joseph. His 2 sons will be numbered among the 12. Now, quickly. And now thy 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Moving on. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people. Now he's talking about Ephraim and Manasseh. And I want to make sure I get it right. So somebody help me out here. Genesis 48. And let's pick it up. Verse 18. All right, verse 17. Genesis 48, verse 17. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. Why? Because Ephraim was the second-born, not the firstborn. This isn't the first time this happened, remember? Jacob and Esau, who did God choose? He chose Jacob. Well, here it's Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob willfully puts his right hand, the strong hand, on Ephraim, who is the second-born son. I don't know why. Maybe one of these men here might know why. I just know in God's sovereignty that was the choice. Let me keep reading. I've not heard that. Is that true? Well, I know he crossed his hand. Yeah. That doesn't bode well for me as the firstborn son, does it? Let me finish it up. Where are we? Verse 17. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. Verse 18. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is my firstborn Manasseh. Put thy right hand upon his head. His father refused, and he says, I know it, my son, I know it. He shall also become a people. He shall also be great, or he shall be great. But truly his younger brother